So, constant lighting. Let's imagine we've got a strobe here that we generally use for underwater photography, and here we go. Now we've got a light. Constant lighting. So basically what we're going to talk about today is using a constant or a video light for shooting underwater photos. We're going to introduce the concept, kind of what it does, how we look at settings and the changes of settings, as well as the pros and cons of shooting with a video light versus shooting with the strobe. So we may include another magic trick, but I doubt it because we did that one and that would get a little crazy. But regardless, let's roll the intro and get started on the tutorial. First things first, what is constant light and how does that affect our camera settings? So if you've been following the video series and have watched my strobe positioning tutorial and also exposure and your histograms, or have joined a workshop in person, there's a two-step process for shooting photos with a strobe. For macro, you're using all artificial light, but for wide angle, you're looking at ambient light and then also considering the strobe light for the foreground. So it's a two-step process. And what happens is when you're composing the scene with the strobe, you can't see what that strobe is going to do in advance. You sort of have to just shoot and then see what you get by reviewing the image after the fact, once you've shot the image. With a constant light, I like to think of this as ambient light. And the reason is because that light is on the whole time you're shooting. So as you're composing the scene, you know exactly what you're looking at because the light is on, the ambient light is on. So whether you're shooting macro or wide angle, you know exactly what the light properties of the scene are because that light is always on. So in a way, shooting constant light makes it much easier to choose settings and compose and shoot your photo. In terms of specific settings, we know that with a strobe, we're going to use a much faster shutter speed because a strobe is a brighter light and it's going to freeze a lot of motion. So manual settings are generally always recommended with a strobe. You've got a lot of power, a lot of light intensity that will help you create great shots with the strobe, even if the subject is moving quickly because we've got a lot of motion being frozen by that strobe firing at 1/10,000th of a second. With our constant light, we are going to adjust the camera settings based on the available light in there. Remember, there's no powerful strobe that's going to come and fill in. So we will generally use a slower shutter speed because the light coming from a constant light and a video light is just not going to be as powerful as a flash from a strobe. Because all the light from the constant light or the video light is in the scene, we can also get away with different settings on the camera too. So instead of shooting in full manual, we can shoot in aperture priority and we could set an aperture and then let the camera meter the exposure and then determine the shutter speed. Or we could even shoot with a time value or a shutter speed priority where we say we limit the minimum shutter speed to 1/60th of a second, 1/80th, 1/125th, and then let the camera decide what the aperture will be based on having that shutter speed locked in. Or we can shoot in manual settings like we would do with the strobe. So basically there's a lot of flexibility because, again, we're seeing all the light in the scene because of the constant light. One of the interesting things when we're looking at a strobe versus a video light is that the strobe is firing really fast and we're using a quick shutter speed. And what that does is that's going to cancel out a lot of lighter ambient light, especially that coming from a video light. So if you're using a faster shutter speed on a strobe, you're not going to see any effect of having a focus light, let's say for macro, or just a video light on regular power in your wide angle scene because that ambient light is going to be canceled out by the faster shutter speed, even though you will still see the strobe light in that exposure. So the pros and cons of using a video light versus a strobe. There are a number of different pros. First off is if you shoot video and you're primarily a video shooter and you want to shoot photos, cool, have at it, shoot with your video light, you're going to still be able to capture some great photos. Same thing if you're just getting started and you can only invest in one light, get that video light and then you'll still be able to shoot video, you'll still have a focus light for macro, and you'll still be able to shoot some nice still photos, you'll have a light for night dives. It's sort of an all-in-one solution to shooting underwater photo and video. Just get that one light and then slowly build up your system from there. Another big benefit to shooting with constant light is when you're shooting fast action. So with a strobe, we all know that there's a recycle time, and depending on your strobe power, you might be able to knock out a few shots before the strobe recycles and you get a black frame, or you get a strobe power that's a lot lower than what you had it set at because it needs to recycle. So if you're going bam, 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 that strobe will not be able to keep up. With a video light, on the other hand, you're using ambient light, so you don't need to wait for anything to recharge or recycle. Have at it. Just set that camera to the fastest drive mode and just go da 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 da. and you're going to be able to keep shooting. So if you've got something like a frogfish yawning or something feeding or some other fast action, shooting with a constant light is actually a really nice way to capture those moments and capture a lot of frames to ensure you have that best moment of the action captured on your camera. Lastly, constant lighting is really popular, and I look up to my friend Mike Bardick at Crystal Blue a lot for this, but creating interesting backlighting effects in your photos, maybe even front lighting effects. So over the past couple years, we've experimented a lot with different lights and narrow beams and homemade snoots and things like that. And now you can actually start to get lights that have snoots built in so that you can create interesting backlighting effects. So, here's a focus light that I generally use on my camera. It's an old iTorch V10. A piece of PVC pipe I had worked on here. You attach it to the front. Now you've got a much narrow beam here so that you can backlight a subject or create more of a pinpoint focus for a subject. You take that off and you've got the wide flood beam of the light. So, lots of experimentation with that back last few years. Then of course this is a big blue light with a spot beam. And this is really interesting to put behind a subject so that if the subject is here, you can start to backlight the subject like this and get interesting effects. So think of something like a seahorse, or maybe it's a frogfish or a cuttlefish, something like that that's really close to the reef. You stick a light behind it, a constant light again, and you can get some really interesting backlight effects. So where you might have your settings set up for strobe, if you start using a constant light, keep that in mind. You want to slow down the shutter speed just enough so that you can really see this start to show up in the frame. So you'll be able to see it in camera as you're composing the scene, but also when you're reviewing the images on your histogram. So constant lights are great for backlighting, side lighting, or interesting lighting effects like that. And now the cons of constant lighting. Dun, dun, dun. But basically, for most still photos, I would always default towards a strobe or a flash, unless you really want to do the creative effects that will come with a light. But for the most part, when you're using a video light, you're just not going to have the same intensity as a strobe that freezes motion, which we talked about before. So if you got a fast subject moving through the frame, something like a sea lion, and you're using strobes, you're gonna have a much better chance at freezing the pupil, freezing the action of their face, even as they're swimming. With the video light, you're gonna use a slower shutter speed, and without that flash to help freeze the motion, they're gonna be a little blurred through the frame. For some subjects, you might even see backscatter particles as blurs through the frame, like in this shot here. By using a strobe, those backscatter particles are just going to be dots. The other thing with video lights is that the light isn't as intense as with the strobe, which I also mentioned earlier, and the result is that depending on the distance from the subject, and especially as you get farther away from the subject, the light loses intensity. And what that does is it starts to get a little more washed out because you lose these colors, the reds, the oranges, the greens, as you descend in the water column, or as this artificial light has more water to travel through between the light, the subject, bouncing off the subject back into the camera. So when you're using video lights, the colors and the shadow contrast, the blacks, might not be as strong as when you're using a strobe that is just more powerful. And for small macro things, it's not really an issue. Your constant light is gonna be very close to the subject, but as you move away and start getting into more of the wide angle realm, that's where the light intensity drops off because you're going through the water and the colors just won't be as vivid. So it's something to consider there. Whenever I talk about purchasing video lights or constant light, I always say that this is one of the few times where money buys more lumens, which buys better results. And that's just the way it is. There's still a decision. Do you invest a lot in one powerful light, or do you invest in two different lights with less power because you want to spread out for wide angle? So that's something to discuss with as you're buying your camera system. But for the most part, more lumens will help you create better light as you get further from the subject. Again, even a small focus light, 1000 lumens, should be fine for shooting macro or super macro, especially if you have your diopter on. It's really wide angle when investing in those lumens is really going to make a difference if you're shooting video or if you're trying to shoot still photos with constant light. So that's pretty much it. Constant lighting in a nutshell. Generally, I will try to have both on a dive trip. I'll bring my video lights, I will bring my strobes, I will bring certain lights for backlighting and things like that when I'm shooting macro. So, it's really up to you to experiment, start getting down and into the sand and looking at what you can shoot, what effects you want to try. I'm always saving images I see online on Facebook or on Instagram and trying to remember them. And before I trip, I'll go through those and start to look at those. Hey, I love that backlit shot that this person, photographed wherever it was. was, Lembe, Dumageddon, Porto Galera. And then I'll save those and say, okay, do I have the supplies ready to go experiment with that? And then once you're on site, bring out those supplies, bring out the light for the backlighting, and try out that constant lighting. Or maybe it's a fast action you really want to get, try out that constant lighting. So anyways, be prepared, study those shots, and hopefully you can capture some unique images by using these different techniques. As always, if you have questions, shoot me an email. Would love to get your ideas for more tutorials. So thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.